movements that we do within our communities, we often are still shrouded in that politics of whiteness and that, you know, refusal to understand the different layers that come on embodied trans experiences.
Like unpacking your privileges.
Yeah, yeah.
No, it's true.
It really is a fundamentally complex topic, and one that we couldn't possibly do complete justice with in the time we have. Sadly, we do need to keep the ball rolling, and I do want to get on the pathology of the medicalization of trans. You know, there's a lot of really complex questions here. How does medical coverage affect the trans experience? What does that say about trans bodies? And kind of the idea that in living as a trans person, there's a kind of perception of genitalia as a public space, where your genitalia is up for discussion and debate with everybody you meet. You know, is that an urban myth, or is that something that you come across?
I come across it a lot. Yeah, it's a hot topic. Everybody asks you the question at least once. Everybody you meet, generally, I find anyway. I don't know about.
Oh yes,
yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
it is a fashionable question for people to come and say. You know, like the other day, I was in a bar and this gentleman comes to me and he says, "Do you still have your penis?" And I looked at him and I said, "How many times did you masturbate today?" He says, "That's none of your business." So you have my answer, you know. So it's pretty much like people, because you are different, sometimes go very much deep into what you have between your legs, which is totally, you would not ask that to anybody, you know, like to considered a normal person within society. A person would not ask, "How is your vagina today?" You know. But to a trans person, it's like the number one thing that comes out often is about what are your genitals all about, and this is it's something that needs to be addressed very much. That it is a personal thing, and just like for the washroom, for example, in C279, the way that they are addressing it at the Senate right now with Senator Plett that wants to change it, pretty much says that if you don't have an operation and you don't change your genitals, that you will need to go to the washroom that is with the genitals that you have. So, for example, FTM that is completely changed as a male, if he doesn't have a penis, will still have to go to the girls' washroom.
Now, how would that make the ladies feel?
Yes,
you walk in.
you know, that would be so. You know, to Senator Platt, I say your 5-year-old granddaughter would kind of freak out seeing a guy coming in with a beard tattoo, and going like, "I'm sorry, I have to come in because I have a vagina still." You know?
There's one thing I'd like to bring up though, is the operations themselves and CAMH. CAMH is a great place where most people end up signing up to be able to get some of the reassignment surgeries. Now, unfortunately, they're overflooding, and you're looking at least 16 months to be able to get spoken to even. And when I called the office personally, after a couple months, they stated they have 2.5 people working in this CAMH office. So you have flooded invoices coming in of requests, and you have 2.5 people working for this. Now, they've tried getting grants and what have you, but they're not going through. So you have all these people that are trying to get surgeries and not having them done. I think that's a huge issue.
Excellent point.
And it creates a lot of, you know, when you're not comfortable in the body you are, you're not capable of producing for society. So somebody that would get the operation and be fully functional and very balanced mentally and everything would create income for the country.
So extra, you know.
I think what it really does as well is it highlights the fact that medical coverage of, for example, sex reassignment surgery, and how that plays, like the delays and the waits, how that plays into mental health, which is also a very serious issue in trans populations. The disproportionate amount of, the disproportionate percentages for depression and serious mental health illnesses and suicide rates, you know, is that related to delays in medical care?
Yes.
Well, that's a very complex issue, but first and foremost, it's important to destroy another big myth, and that's that being trans is actually a mental health issue. Being trans is not a disorder. It's certainly not a mental illness, and it can't be cured for the simple reason that it's not a disease. So, so the mental health issues that some trans people might have has nothing to do with the fact of their condition of being trans. It has to do with other factors. But you've raised the question of things like the suicide rate of being over 40% for the trans community. That was one thing I was personally a little dubious about this figure myself until a couple of years ago when I was out with 8 of my most stable trans friends at a restaurant, and we by now don't usually get into many details about about trans things. We talk about other other subjects. That evening we got into considerable detail about our lives, and to my shock, I found out that 4 of the 8 had attempted suicide, and these were some of the most stable trans persons that I know. It was shocking for me. So now I totally believe that 40% plus figure, and that is not only a tragedy; it's an outrage that we allow that kind of situation to happen without any more public support. We wouldn't allow that for any other group in our society. Only proves just how much the trans community is one of the most marginalized communities in our society.
If I can take off of Jean's point, I mean, mental illness, to label it as it's terrible, but some things are covered due to it. That's the only flip of that coin, is that you consider it a mental illness, and then certain things are covered. So, which way do you go with it?
I think you raise a great point. I think it's gender dysphoria is the DSM thing that is recognized, and that opens a lot of medical doors, which allows for sex reassignment surgery. And we've mentioned in passing a couple of times now Bill C-279 and the Senate hearings that happened around that a little while ago, and the idea of real women. And I think this is a great question. What I thought was really interesting is that the idea that somebody can impose or validate how real a man or how real a woman you are. Is that something that you come across?
Yes. Have you guys ever experienced that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. I find that it is very, like a man, when a little boy plays with a truck and a girl plays with a Barbie, and all this stereotyping that we have within society. But we need to understand that a child, when I was a little child, and I use the word child, not a boy, I would play as a girl with girls and play with dolls and stuff and dress up like a girl. Then I would dress up as a guy and play with my friends, cowboy and trucks and everything. And for me, both identities were just about the way I dressed. It wasn't about, because I thought that everybody on the planet had a penis. You don't know when you're a child. You don't know. Everybody that has a vagina thinks that everybody has a vagina, and everybody that has a penis thinks that everybody has a penis. It's just that with time, we discover that we are different in our genitals. And then all this identity comes out. And it's society that is taking the children and imposing looks, imposing stereotype, and impose all of that. And when society starts to, a lot of parents now are open-minded to what the gender identity that their children are expressing. And in a school in the United States the other day, out of 1,400 students, the parents came into the first year class, and said, our daughter's actually a boy. And the principal said, it's okay, we have 14 others in the school. So, evolution.
And I think that's a great point to make. I know that in another episode in the series, we look very specifically at gender creative kids and transitioning in youth and hormone suppression therapies and all of the other options that are there around that. So for more information, look it up online. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. Instead of getting into the topic of passing, which is its whole new charade of myths and legends in the trans experience, We're going to cut to a break, and when we get back, we'll be looking at what is passing, what does it mean, and how that kind of plays out in the lived experience of trans people. We're talking about trans rights here on Let's Talk CanQueer, the show that brings you the biggest issues facing gender and sexual minorities. Hello and welcome back to Let's Talk CanQueer, the show that brings you the biggest issues facing gender and sexual minorities living in Canada. I will remember the name. Today's show is on trans rights, and I am joined by some fantastic guests. Joining me is Dan Irving, Jean Charbonneau, Alex Thompson, and Sophia Kasivi. And we had a great discussion in the last segment, and I just want to kind of bring in an element of that before we move on to things like suicide rates, underemployment. I want to look at the topic of passing. How important is it to pass, and what is passing?
I think passing is such a problematic term, and within trans communities we often acknowledge that, because passing, for one, it denotes that there has to be, in order to pass, you have to have somebody else recognize you. And one of the myth-busting points that we haven't brought up is that gender is self-determined, and it's somebody's gender identity is theirs to declare, and it's how we understand ourselves, not how somebody else tells us we are. And passing denotes that we've somehow tricked somebody into believing that we are legitimately men or women, or that we're legitimately who we identify as. And so it has power laid right in it. When I'm doing my interviews with underemployed and unemployed people, passing is huge, because if they don't pass, even on a CV, if it can be detected that they're trans, they won't get a job interview. And if they don't pass at the interview, they don't get the job. And if they transition on the job, they often lose it. And passing is something that also feeds into people's comfortability level with gender.
I think it very much plays into a point that we made earlier around the idea of somebody kind of dictating how much of a man, or if you're a real woman, or if you're a real man. I think passing kind of plays into that myth. And it also plays into, as we were saying earlier, about people wanting to know what's between your legs. And there's a lot of imposing on trans people.
Absolutely. I agree with Dan. The very term passing is problematic. What's the opposite of passing? It's failing. Mm-hmm. Actually, I prefer, of course, trans people usually just want to blend in. They don't like to be gawked at. They really just want to blend. So probably blending is a better use of terms. But yeah.
Just feeding off what Dan had said, there's a close friend of mine And I mean, he works behind a computer because for the first couple years, he was scared to go out and face people. So for him to transition behind closed doors, he works in IT. So what are you looking at? You're looking at a computer, and you're making pretty good money. So at that point, there's a lot of people that just, you know, maybe they can find a job, but they don't want to face society because there are restrictions placed on you at that point.
I think you raised a great point, Dan, in terms of the under and unemployment of trans people. Trans people are usually much higher educated. They have a higher rate of post-secondary education, but a much lower rate of employment. What's the reason for that?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. So, I mean, borrowing off what research participants have told me,